Good evening. I'm Corvallis Advocate Assistant Editor Emily Radcliffe, and co-moderating with me tonight is our publisher, Steve Schultz, who also serves as president of the City Club of Corvallis. Welcome to tonight's CitySpeak Forum. CitySpeak Forums are co-presented by the Corvallis Advocate and the City Club of Corvallis. The Advocate offers fresh Corvallis news daily online, these town hall meetings, and extensive events calendars. Our co-presenter, the City Club of Corvallis, is a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that seeks to present a diversity of viewpoints and constructive dialogue. On Thursday at 6 p.m., we'll host a live stream town hall for the 3 of 9 city council races that are contested, which concludes 4 nights of debates we've hosted this cycle. Videos for last week's State House and Senate, as well as county commissioner debates, are available on the Advocate's website. Tonight, we host the 3 candidates vying to replace Biff Traber as mayor: Roen Hogg, Charles Maughan, and Andrew Struthers. Steve?
Thank you, Emily. Funding for these programs, CitySpeak programs, come from First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op and Peak Sports, but we could not present them without folks like you, viewers, that also support these forums. You can do that by subscribing. If you go to our website, there's monthly subscription rates for $10 or $15 monthly. Over and above contributions are, of course, welcome. Folks, locally run news outlets like the Corvallis Advocate are pretty scarce nowadays, and folks that support them are scarcer still. Please do consider joining the folks that do support us. For those of you that do support us, we really do quite appreciate it. And we hope that we are able to continue to serve you for years to come. But we do need your help to assure that that is the case. Emily?
Thanks, Steve. And first, thank you all for participating in this evening's debate. My first question is, if elected, what is the singular most important issue you would hope to impact in Corvallis during your tenure if you could only impact just one thing? What would your goal be, and what would the city, in your view, need to do to achieve that goal? Mr. Hogg, I'll start with you. 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
Well, the number one issue for Corvallis is affordable housing. And so first, I'd like to say thank you very much for hosting this forum, and so that we can address these issues. But affordable housing affects people at all walks of life. So if you're don't have any home at all, it's getting a roof over your head. If you're a young family, it means one thing. If you're a student, it means something else. And if you're a retired person, it means being able to afford the taxes so you can stay in your house. And so the affordable housing has a broad range. And so we really need to address those issues. And so the city is being impacted, just as all other cities are across the state, from mandates coming down from Salem. So these are state mandates saying that this is what you have to do in terms of your zoning, and basically taking away local control to address issues. And this has big impacts in terms of, we're doing density in terms of height of buildings, but there's no requirements that actually the fire department is able to access and provide safety for buildings of those heights, or the width of streets being able to accommodate large truck ladders, and also for parking requirements. And so the big issues really is going to be about livability for our community. So the horse has already left the barn in terms of, from the state, taking away local cities' rights to do annexation and zoning. But the issue at the city level is, how can we try to maintain the great livability that we have in Corvallis while addressing the livability issues and affordability issues for everybody in the city.
All right, and Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting tonight's CitySpeak, and thank you to our hosts. The number one issue to me is the affordability and livability to live in our city and move around our city as a whole. It does start with housing. We have a significant housing shortage in Corvallis right now, and we need to grow and we need to change. Whether that is, sprawling out into our urban growth boundary or building upwards, or both. We have, around 20 to 22,000 individuals who commute to Corvallis on a daily basis. And this puts a major strain on our cities. And so in our transportation. So we need to get people living here. We need to get people off our roadways. And the city can really, focus that. We can incentivize people to develop here, for developers to come here. We can work to change our land development code to make it easier to develop. We've seen this with our mixed use code already, to be able to build more of those type of projects. And we need to foster and support our businesses here and grow new ones. There's a lot of families, when we talk about affordability and livability, they can't shop here in our community for their kids, for themselves, and just in general. That goes from clothes to shoes to even car seats. I've started having conversations. I can't actually think of a place where I can shop for a car seat in this community for my family and for other families. I'd be happy for someone to point me out where to go and help other families with that. And so that all contributes to affordability and the livability of just being able to live here, to move around our city. We got to foster each other and continue to build and change with the times, because things aren't what they were 20 years ago, and we need to keep moving forward. And that includes, again, growing our housing, fostering our businesses, and then improving our transportation systems so we can get cars off the road and help address climate change as well. And that, to me, is all one umbrella of affordability and livability in Corvallis. Thank you.
Right, and Mr. Maughan, 2 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Steve, and thank you to the Advocate and the City Club for hosting this forum. My issue is also on housing. I can't say specifically, but there it is, affordable housing. And I'm the only one in this race who has direct knowledge of affordable housing. It's what I do for a living. Through my time as a community manager of affordable housing complex in downtown Corvallis for seniors and persons with disability, to my time on the Hope Advisory Board, that's the joint city-county board to address homelessness in the area, to my day job as a compliance analyst for Oregon Housing and Community Services. I know the process of getting funding for these programs. I know what we need. We've seen the numbers, and it's about time we start getting some of the development that we see throughout the state. I regularly attend the Housing Stability Council meetings of Oregon, and I see funding going out to all other communities, from Milwaukee to Beaverton, but we get very little here, and we need to start focusing on how to go after those funds and have housing developed so we can have people live here and work here and thrive. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then moving on to the next questions, this is actually derived from some areas of focus that were laid out in the Benton County Voters Pamphlet. And a couple of these were already touched on by all of you just now. But Mr. Struthers, your opponents believe some of the most pressing issues are community livability and limited public input on land use changes. How would you address these issues? 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
So on the land use participation, that starts at the state level. We need to be a voice at DLCD that, and I'm sorry, I used an acronym there and it just blanked on me, but they are the state agency working at that level that affects our land development code and gets pushed down from the state level. And then ultimately we need to be publishing out there, making it aware that our planning commission is having meetings, our city council is having meetings, using what we're now having our International Association of Public Participation, and using that model to bring folks into our conversations, whether that's through forums, whether that's through remote forums like this or in person at the library. What do we need to do to get people aware of what's actually happening? We know how to do it. We know how to do it in Corvallis, and we know how to do it well. And so I think we need to do more outreach, and that can be done. On the affordable living, I've already touched on a little bit. It starts out, can you shop here? Can you live here? Can you commute within our city? Again, I don't know a lot of places. There are some shops in our community where you can shop, but it's not a lot. And I hear a lot of times that it's hard to shop here and really commute around in our city. And to me, that's a big part of the livability portions of it.
Right, and Mr. Maughan, your opponents believe some of the most pressing issues are ensuring a transportation system that works for all and greater mental health resources. How would you address these issues? 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
Thank you. I'll start with transportation. One of the issues I hear about regularly is complaints around our Corvallis transit system. I hear complaints from riders on behavior for some of our bus drivers, and I think a lot of that stems from it being third party. We don't directly hire our bus drivers. It's contracted out to a third party. And I think that needs to change. I think by bringing those drivers in-house, become city employees, we could provide better pay, better living wages, and, make them part of our community. and better education and training to where we have better service. And through better service, we're going to have more ridership, and that reduces single vehicle occupancy, single occupancy vehicles, and promotes our system to be more robust, and we can bring back our weekend transportation. The other part around mental health, we're going to have to work with the county on that, and maybe even the state. And part of what we need to do is start, lobbying our legislators. And I think we need to, rally our community to go up and really talk to our legislators about getting funding so we can expand the mental health care in this area. I know I have a child who struggles with trying to find a regular counselor right now, and I'm working with the school district on that, but that's not enough. And we're lacking mental health care pretty severely here locally. So the only way to fix that is by getting more funding and hopefully getting more people to live here who are educated in that field.
And Mr. Hogg, your opponents believe some of the most pressing issues are sustainability and strengthening the local economy. What would you do to address these issues? Two Minister Lester, respond, please.
Well, both of those are really important issues in our community. So for sustainability, we've put together, when I was on City Council, a climate action plan to address some of these issues. And this was started a number of years ago, and we've done a really good job of putting together the plan. But the problem now is becoming the implementation of the plan. And so that is a role that the mayor, I think, can be a big help in terms of trying to move things forward. And so the job of the mayor is really to bring people together, to champion ideas from the community and help it move through the system in terms of having the counselors have enough information to make decisions. And so we've seen before with the home energy score, something was pushed to the council before it was really ready for prime time. And it forced the counselors in a very uncomfortable position, trying to have to vote either yes or no on something that wasn't fully fleshed out. And so it should have gone back to another work session or been consulted with on different organizations before council was pressed to make a decision. So the mayor can help with all of those issues. On economy, this has always been a strong point for me, is to promote local businesses. I was the liaison for the Downtown Corvallis Association. I went regularly to their meetings to try to promote local business, to try to see what we can do to try to help the downtown to be a very vibrant place. And there's also businesses across the city as well, involving with the chamber in terms of trying to make Corvallis a vital place that is easy to do business and contributes to the community.
Thank you. And then moving on to some more issues, and I know that a lot of you, or many of you, had already touched on housing as one, and affordability and availability of such. But in recent polling, Oregon voters prioritized two issues: homelessness and crime. What would you do to address these two issues in our community? Mr. Maughan, I'll start with you. 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
So I feel these are, although they're related, they're really two different issues. When it comes to how do we help our unhoused neighbors, we need to provide stability. The process the city has right now of posting camps and clearing camps is just a revolving, never-ending process. We post a camp, we clear a camp, and that's our parks and rec people who are clearing these camps, and that's not the role they signed up for. Those people move on down the road, losing some of their belongings, maybe losing their medication. Maybe they're on medication for whatever mental health issues or other health issues. We have a lot of very vulnerable populations there. They reset up camp, we post it again, we move them on down the road. And a lot of times we're just driving them further and further from those resources they need to try to get off the streets. We have groups that are trying to go out into the forest near the railroad tracks, further and further away from the roads, and it's becoming a dangerous situation. And we've already seen fires and other problems caused by people just trying to keep warm. And our city services are having trouble getting to them because we're driving them further away. So I believe in that situation, we need to find a way to find a spot where people can be. We keep saying you can't be here, you can't be here. Where can you be? So we need to focus on that. Then we can start providing service to those people. And I think by providing services and showing that we're a city that cares, we might see a reduction in crime from those individuals. According to Chief Sassman, one of our previous chiefs of police, it's a very small portion of that population that's actually committing a lot of these acts of vandalism and crime and behavioral problems. But how much of that is because we keep kicking them on down the road? We need to address it. We need to provide services. We need to rely on Benton County Health Department to provide services to people, but you need to know where people are to do that. And when it comes to overall crime in the city, I do notice there's been an uptick of graffiti and vandalism and hostile behavior behind the wheel. And I think, we're looking at a criminal justice assessment. We're still in that process of developing that. And it'll be interesting to see what the county comes up with. But I do believe we need to expand on that so people can be held accountable and get them into the court system.
Thank you. And Mr. Hogg, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
So when I first got on city council, I proposed a goal that city should be addressing homelessness. There had never been a council goal to do that. And I always thought that a city such as Corvallis should be doing more to help those who are in need. So we put together, the council agreed, and we had a goal to address homelessness. And when I was on the city council, I worked with community members to get the location of the current men's cold weather shelter. And so again, that was a process that involved a lot of different people and a lot of different discussions to actually make a difference for those who are in need. Because again, at that time, there was no permanent place for people to go in the winter. And for a city such as Corvallis, it's not something that was right to happen. And so there's still a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of trying to get people housed. And when I was on city council, I was Barbara Ross, who was a former state representative and Benton County commissioner, proposed the idea of housing first. And I saw how she did it. This was the idea of getting people into housing first, and then you bring the services to them. And she did it through evidence-based decision-making, showing how other cities had done it and how they had been successful. And we should do something similar in Corvallis, look at what's working in other cities and then do that here as well. As far as crime, when I was on the city council, I pushed for a council goal to address public safety. This is for 911 dispatch center, police, and fire, because all three work together. And we've worked to get increased funding for all three of those departments. And this involved allowed us to get a community policing officer. So you basically have police walking the beat who are actually in the neighborhoods, seeing what the issues are. And also one of my goals for mayor is to get community mental health resources. And so that would be something that I would address as well.
Great, and Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, and thank you for this question. I'll start with crime, and on the crime side, a lot of it starts with the facilities that we currently have. Right now, we have a jail that's very inadequate. It was built as a temporary jail, and it doesn't hold the population, the individuals who are committing the crime currently. And I want to be clear. Individuals who are homeless or unsheltered, they are not the prominent individuals committing crime in our community. There are people who take advantage, knowing we don't have a jail that can hold them. Talking with officers, talking with our chief of police and our captains, we have individuals who will get arrested, taken to the jail, and immediately be released because there's not a space to hold them. And that's a problem. And so I commend Benton County and our Benton County commissioners for working on the justice system improvement program, at looking at a new correctional facility, looking at a new jail, so we can make improvements in that realm. And I think if we can do that, that will help the long term in there. And as mayor, I've been talking with some of the councilors, and if I'm elected mayor, one of the first things I would like to see is the council coming out and supporting what the county commissioners and taking a vote on support for that. On the homeless front, we've been doing a lot of good work, but a lot of work still needs to be done. One of the main things that I would like to see, and we're there, is working with our service providers, working with the county to get more funding into our city to help build with sheltering, build permanent supportive housing. And just recently, last 2 years, the city pushed out over almost $700,000 for supportive housing. Housing is not cheap to build in Corvallis, and so we need to get the funding out there. We need to use all the resources that we can. And then we need to be coordinating together. We recently got $1 million for the next 2 years through Oregon House Bill 4123 for better coordination and hiring more staff to be doing the work between the city, county, and our service providers.
All right, and what, as mayor, would you advocate for to accelerate the availability of housing that's affordable to the bottom 25% of area income earners, and above that for folks up to 50%? Mr. Hogg, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
Well, we need to look at providing more density type of housing, but housing that fits what people's needs are. So currently when we do high density housing in Corvallis, it inevitably turns out to be very expensive student housing. So this is 5 bedrooms, and each bedroom has its own bathroom. So 5 bedroom, 5 bathroom apartment with a tiny common living area, which is for a kitchen and a sofa. And they're renting, $800 plus per bedroom. So this is high density housing, but it's not the affordable type of housing. And so I think as mayor and as the city, we really need to look at trying to build the type of housing that would really benefit the majority of the people who are needing housing in the city, and looking at not just saying we're building high density housing that turns out to be very expensive student housing. And so we need to build the type of housing that people want and that people need and that people can actually afford.
All right, and Mr. Maughan, 2 minutes or less, please.
So as I said earlier, I'm the only candidate running for mayor that understands affordable housing. I understand the different funding layers and how they interact. And one of the things the city can do directly to guarantee affordable housing development is by purchasing land. We can use a construction excise tax, and when there's appropriate land that would be good for a development for either multifamily or specific, maybe for permanent supportive housing, whatever it may be, we can purchase the land, and then we can do a low-cost lease of that land to a developer who wants to develop any type of affordable housing. We can set what the requirements are of that. And then as a city, once we accept the plans and we work together with the developer, they can go get low-income housing tax credit development, home funds, LIFT funds. There's plenty of programs out there that are state and federal funds, but they usually like to give them to developers who show that they have support of the community. And that's something the city of Corvallis could directly do. And we can see that money come into our community and the development that we need for that affordable housing.
All right, and Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less, please.
I think it begins working directly with developers, figuring out where we're putting the barriers up as a city, whether it's in our land development code, whether it's state regulations, and then working with them and trying to figure out how we can make that type of development much easier in our community to happen. One of the things I'm proud of, is back in April of this year, the city council provided $400,000 for an affordable housing project in South Corvallis using our affordable housing construction excise tax. And reason we gave them this amount of money to our developer is they were using that help to leverage to get more state funding for this development, and they were successful. And so we're going to see a 60-unit affordable housing project developed. It's targeted, for folks with at 60% or less of the median area income, but it's a great example of what the city has done. I will agree with my opponent that the city needs to purchase land and then do a lease agreement with a developer. And we actually have a great example up here in my ward, currently up here in Northeast in Ward 9, where we renewed a new contract with a management company where we actually own the land, and they're actually running the affordable housing project. And that's a very successful up in my area, especially in that part of my ward. There's a lot of low-income families, and so being able to have a project like that, having it being successful and having spread out for multiple years, we're not talking the short term, it's going to be there for decades, is wonderful. And then the last thing is, let's look at some tax incentives. What can we do around to eliminate the property taxes for 10 years or 20 years so that there's a benefit to actually develop that type of housing. I would like to see, this concept that was in Corvallis for a while and then sort of left and sort of permeating into coming back as a multi-unit tax exemption. And so looking at that and bringing something like that back. So thank you.
All right, and as the city considers various developments, especially in reference to housing, how much weight should neighborhood and homeowners groups and associations have on city decision-making? Mr. Maughan, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
So it's one area we seem to have found a decline in is public participation. I think hearing from community members is vital. How much that weighs in depends on what the city needs as a whole, because we're not talking about individual communities when running a city. It's taken the entire city's needs and concerns in balance. I feel that any decisions with any kind of development, we should hear from the surrounding communities because they understand their communities in ways that as elected officials, unless we happen to live in that neighborhood, we'll never understand. I think we need to bring back and focus on public participation, and I always encourage that. So again, it's about balance. It's about we need to understand the needs. We need to understand the potential impacts a development could have in the neighborhood, but we need to weigh that against how does this development affect the city? Is it something we need? We were just talking about affordable housing, or is it something else? And do they meet the requirements of that area, especially when it comes to things like annexation?
Right, and Mr. Hogg, 2 minutes or less, please.
So previously in the past, we were able to get a lot of input from neighborhoods, neighborhood groups about the impact of development in their neighborhoods. But this has all been changed at the state level. Basically, the state has taken away pretty much any local decision-making about development. And they're basically stating, even in terms of zoning, any zoning requirements. And what's even more challenging is they're making the rules up on the fly. So they basically said, new rules are going into effect, starting January 1. But when the city asks, well, what are these rules? They say, well, we're still working on them. And this was even last week, they're still working on what are exactly other rules, for parking requirements and so on in terms of doing development. So it's making it very, very difficult for the planning department at the city to actually try to reach out to neighborhoods and communities to try to tell them what's coming or what could be in the place, because even they don't know what the rules are because they're still being written on the fly. And this is happening across all of Oregon, all the cities in Oregon. And so we're really under very new situation and very new constraints that we've never experienced as a city before. And this is really going to impact a lot of different neighborhoods. And this is one of the main issues I'm running on for mayor, is try to see, well, what can we do in terms of trying to mitigate these mandates, which we have very little or no control over. And so it's very challenging in terms of trying to embrace neighborhood decision-making in terms of these policies.
And Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less, please.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a lot that can go into this question. It would definitely take me more than 2 minutes to answer. But we, the last 2 years, 3 years, we've experienced a pandemic, and through COVID, we learned a lot about how we can be reaching out to our neighborhood associations, to our community. And, this is just what we're doing tonight. Is just one example. We're having a remote forum, and doing that type of outreach is going to be important. And then as we can get back into meeting with our neighborhood associations and really working with them to understand what the long-term goals of the city are, and then also long-term goals of the state, because the state is pushing a lot of new regulations down on us. Parking is one, housing one. House Bill 2001, the way that we look at middle housing has completely changed. How we're looking at parking through the climate-friendly, equitable communities is changing. Just 2 meetings ago for our city council meetings, we essentially lifted all minimum parking requirements for the city for development. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, but it's a major change, and as a commuter city, that's going to be a major impact. And there, as city councilors, as electeds, we wear two hats. One, we're elected by our wards, and so we really, our job is to represent our wards. But two, we also wear a hat to represent the whole city and make decisions that are important for the whole city. And so we have to find a way that we can balance those type of decision-making processes. And then also, when we do update our land development code, are we meeting state regulations and requirements? And then when we do have a land use case before us, how are we evaluating the criteria of our land development code to that development and ensuring we're meeting the goals of the city, but we're also, making sure we're taking the input of our community, the neighborhood associations, and everyone else that's involved in that decision-making process.
Right, and the city council recently chose to forestall its own action on requiring homeowners to obtain an energy usage audit or home energy score prior to putting their homes on the market, and instead put the potential requirement to voters. First, do you personally support the requirement? And do you believe it was better to move the matter to a public vote than for the council to decide? Mr. Hogg, 1 minute or less to respond, please.
And so this is something that I had mentioned previously. I think it was a mistake that this was brought to the council before it was ready for prime time, and it forced the council to make a decision whether to vote to support it or to send it to the voters. This is something that should have been brought to reach, at least talk to the Realtors Association, because they're responsible for selling most of the homes, and get their input, and also to have broader outreach within the community to get more, flesh out some more of the details of how are you going to do enforcement, how are you going to actually do these inspections, and so that the council be fully informed when they made a decision. And so this is something that the mayor could help in terms of when they put items on the agenda.
Right, and Mr. Struthers, a minute or less, please.
I will try here in a minute less. So I will admit I was the one that brought forward the idea of sending it to the voters. I will own that. I don't regret that decision to this day. And primarily because I did that is because I felt like we were being rushed. We were being told that you need to vote on this ordinance without taking into consideration any policy decisions that were within it, without reviewing it, without actually having a discussion. And I would prefer us not to send it to the voters. I would prefer, that we actually took some, immediate action. But I was also hearing from my community members that they weren't happy. They weren't happy with how they were being pushed out of the discussion, how it felt rushed. We had one work session, and then it was 6 months later, it was, here's something to vote on. We did table it a couple of times. But then I also was listening to my city councilors, my other councilors, and by my count, and I would have to go back and watch our meetings again, I knew of at least 6 city councilors who were not happy with the ordinance that was in front of us and were ready to vote no. And so that's why I ultimately pushed it to go to the public.
All right, and Mr. Maughan, a minute or less, please.
Sure. I completely supported the home energy score. And hearing things like that it was rushed, that council wasn't prepared. This was 6 years in the making. This is part of our climate action plan. It's number 2 on the land use part of it. This was vetted by the Sustainability Coalition, and they held public forums. It went through the Climate Action Advisory Board, where they held public hearings on. It went to council earlier this year, and council unanimously wanted it brought forth back to council. During a work session, that's what they asked for, is to have it brought back to council. So to feel it was rushed seems kind of ridiculous. How many years does it take to work on something? 6 years seems more than adequate. This is something that the council's is their job to vote on issues like this. And sometimes decisions are tough. And I feel as mayor, it's the mayor's job to present issues to remind council that they asked for this to come back, that it's well within their rights to make a decision on this requirement. So yeah, I support the home energy score. I'm worried that it's going to voters. It's going to cost thousands of dollars. We're going to see public interest funding against it. The council should have just voted on it, whether up or down, and have that political willpower to do so.
All right, and then moving from home energy scores, the City Council also recently approved the Corvallis Green New Deal for climate and housing justice. As mayor, what would you do first to implement this new resolution? And what are your views generally on the connections or relationship between taking action on the climate crisis and providing direct support to community members experiencing houselessness? Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
Thank you. And I first want to thank, Sunrise Corvallis for bringing this forward. I met with them at least 3 times, working on some of the language, some of my concerns. And then also thanking my, my city councilors, fellow city councilors, for taking a look at the resolutions. And, we made changes the night that we voted on this. And some of the language was completely changed to that felt was more amenable to the community. And so I appreciate that. I think as mayor, one of the most important things is that we need to be working as a community to reach those goals. And I've shown with my time as a city councilor that I can bring folks together. I can bring not just locally partners together, but regional partners as well. To be pushing that conversation out there when it comes to working. You mentioned the homelessness, the houselessness. The biggest thing is we need to be working with our service providers, with our city partners, with our county partners, and just figuring out how we're going to get all that funding model set up. We don't have all the resources. The city is not a service provider. And so we need to be working with the experts in the field and then figure out how we're going to get the funding into our city. On the climate crisis, working with the community, the biggest thing is continuing to make sure people understand what the climate crisis is and why we're there. Coming up in less than a month, we're going to be publishing the Northwest Natural Franchise Agreement for public comment, and really trying to get understanding what we're doing for natural gas in our city. And then also looking at how we're going to be looking at decarbonization of our utilities, whether that's moving away from natural gas long-term. And then we're also going to be talking about how we're getting more solar panels, more renewable energies on our city buildings. I'm happy to say during the remodeling of fire stations 2 and 3, we're going to be looking at solar panels for those facilities. And so there's just a lot that goes into this. And I would be happy to meet with anyone to really talk more about my policies and my ideas. 2 minutes is not enough time, so thank you.
Right, and Mr. Maughan, 2 minutes or less, please.
So I worked with Sunrise Corvallis on this resolution and gave them advice on how to refine it. I also have the endorsement of Sunrise Corvallis. Climate action is an important issue for me. My very first meeting regarding our strategic operating plan, I pushed and fought to get a goal of 100% renewable energy for municipal buildings. I didn't get that goal. I got little bits at a time, and I continued to work on it over the years to finally get a goal of 100% renewable electrical power by 2030. That goal has been pushed forward because the city finally had to take action on how to achieve it. And I'm happy to say through programs, through additional solar and programs like Blue Sky, the city's going to reach that goal next year as long as everything stays on track. That's huge. That's impact to addressing climate change. We need to continue looking for solutions like that and how the city can transition by switching its fleet to electric vehicles, by providing vehicle chargers for the city and supporting the city in transitioning away from natural gas and onto renewable electricity. I also, as said earlier, I already support that we need to stop posting camps. We need to provide stability for our unhoused neighbors as they transition into permanent housing as that gets developed. We can do that on an emergency basis by using land that we already have on, again, emergency situation, but providing services, hygiene services, and provide some stability for those people, and then allow our parks department to actually keep our parks clean and safe, which is what they were hired to do.
Great. And Mr. Hogg, 2 minutes or less, please.
Yeah, so I fully support the Green New Deal. And when I was on city council, we made a goal to have climate change become a city council goal. And it's been a long time coming in terms of trying to get from ideas to getting a plan in place to getting implementation. And so we still have a long way to go. You know, climate change and nuclear war are the two major issues that affect us on a global level. And so we need to be committed as a city to addressing those and working with members of the community for ideas that they have of how we can implement this. We also should be looking at other cities and see how have they successfully implemented some of these ideas and then doing the same here in Corvallis. So we should be learning from other cities what are some of the ways that we can actually be effective in making real changes so that we can address climate change. And so again, I want to thank all the people that worked on this. This is a very important goal, and it means a lot that people are dedicated in working to try to make this happen.
All right. And then by most accounts, the worldwide economy finds itself in uncertain times, and it appears our economy is no exception. Given the times, what steps do you believe the city should be considering next year as it prepares its budget? Mr. Maughan, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
The budget's a complicated issue because it's not set by one person. We have a budget committee that reviews it. All city departments create the budget, and it gets presented to us, and we have to vote it pretty much up or down. I think we need to change our process so we spend more time reviewing the details to figure out, are we spending our city resources wisely? When it comes to, you talk about kind of nationally and stuff, I think we need to focus on supporting local business and creating a local structure of economy that will be more sustainable going into the future. We need to, build up that. We need to support it. We need to find ways to incentivize local business development so we're not traveling further and further for the needs that we have. When it comes to budget preparedness, though, again, we need to rethink our process on the budget so we have more time and people can feel empowered to give suggested edits to the budget instead of just voting up or down. I've personally been part of budget meetings where it was frowned upon to suggest an amendment to the budget. And that shouldn't be. That is the budget committee's job, is to look at the budget, look for improvements, and make those amendments.
Right. And Mr. Hogg, 2 minutes or less to respond, please.
So the way the city is currently structured, the budget is really the preview of the city council. The mayor has very little or almost no role in terms of approving the budget. So it's a budget committee consists of 9 community members and 9 city councilors. And then it is the city council that then makes the final decisions on the budget. When I was on city council, I was a very strong advocate for supporting the city's services. So this includes the Majestic Theater, the Aquatic Center, the library, the city parks. All of those are great services that the city provides to members of the community, and they all, in a sense, lose money, but their sense of that's what people are paying taxes for, that they want something that makes Corvallis a better place to live. And so I've always been a strong advocate for those, as well as for public safety, because those are basic fundamental services that the city provides. And as well, we also have transportation in terms of the city buses that we need to keep running. But again, this is something that is the city council will be making the decisions. As a mayor, you're really being a spokesperson and trying to advocate and trying to express the thoughts of people across the entire city.
And Mr. Struthers, 2 minutes or less, please.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying, our city budget, we're in a very good fiscally sound position right now. And that is going into the next year. I think that the biggest priority for me as mayor, if I was elected mayor, or even now as a city councilor, is making sure that we're able to commit to the services that our community expects. And ensuring that, those are the priorities. Our city services need to be the priority. And that's where it comes into a balancing act. Okay, we have we have city services that we need to be providing, whether that's Parks and Rec, whether it's transportation through our transit system, to making sure we have clean water, going into our homes and businesses and other places. And so when we start talking about new initiatives, how are we going to combat climate change? How are we going to address help those who are with houselessness? How are we going to address, this road over, in this part of the community? It starts playing into a balancing act of, we got city services we need to provide, and then there's all these additional initiatives. And so really, as mayor, you need to be able to be a leader in the room and to help the city council filter that conversation. I know how to lead meetings. I think that is a major part of the mayor's role, is to help facilitate meetings and help lead those meetings. And I mean, I did that during our advisory board restructuring processes. We were doing paper and tape on the walls with how we're going to, focus our areas of our advisory boards. And that was a very successful operation that I sort of led to get us there. And that's what we need to do from a budgeting standpoint. We start talking about new initiatives into our budget. And so we have to find that balancing act. And that's the major thing going into this next year, depending on the world economy and our local economy, and really focusing on our budget.
Right. And as city budget decisions were being made earlier this year, many in the community expressed the view that the Majestic Theater should have its budget and staff increased. The city chose not to do so, however. Do you believe this was the right choice? And what are your views generally on how budget and personnel played out at the Majestic this year? Mr. Hogg, 1 minute or less to respond, please.
Well, I've always been a strong supporter of the Majestic Theater, and I was the liaison to the Majestic Theater when it was under the previous management of being run by a nonprofit. And we had a lot of issues there. And then we turned it around by taking it under the city's wing and hiring city staff to run the theater. And it was being successfully run. So there was a big change there. But we need to look at what other cities have done. In Albany, they have the Albany Community Theater, ACT, which has been very successful for decades. And they actually receive no funding from the city, and they don't even, they have their own building. We have the Arts Center in Corvallis, which uses a city building, but it's a nonprofit that runs it. And it also has been very successful for decades. So we need to look at other models to see how can we keep the Majestic Theater running and providing the service that it does to the community.
And Mr. Maughan, 1 minute or less, please.
I feel the Majestic's a vital part of our community. It provides an outlet for people who normally wouldn't have it. It helps people develop as community leaders. They become part of something bigger than themselves. I would have liked to have seen the Majestic get the funding that they said they needed, but at the same time, I understand that the city does have a set budget. And, perhaps we do need to analyze how the Majestic is being operated. Is there opportunities? Do they actually need this additional funding, or are there other ways to get the funding for them besides just through the regular city budget? So I agree. We need to look at other resources, find different ways to support the community. And this is a vital part of that community, and we need to keep it going.
And Mr. Struthers, 1 minute or less, please.
Yeah, so I support the Majestic Theater. I support all arts. I was actually part of the performing arts through my high school and college years, primarily on the music side of things. And so it was a difficult decision related to the Majestics. And I believe at the moment the city was making the right decision related to it, adding additional FTE. There's some budget constraints with the Majestic. There's some budgeting issues that we need to figure out, and particularly on the revenue side versus expenses, and making sure and finding that balancing act. But back in one of our most recent September meetings for the city council, our Parks and Rec director, along with our, I believe our assistant Parks and Rec director was there as well, but that's besides the point. They presented a really good plan to move forward and how to slowly increase the FTE over the next couple of years. And that's, really looking at restructuring, the Majestic staff with the overall Parks and Rec staff. And so I expect us to see that happening. It's going to take time. And it's going to be a balancing act.
All right, thank you all. And I will now hand it over to Steve for audience questions.
Thank you, Emily. Before we get to audience questions, I do want to remind the audience, you can still ask a question if you would like. CitySpeak, you can email cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. That's cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. Also, I want to let the audience know these questions are not in any particular order. A few of them I've tried to order if I see that they're related to one another. But the reality of it is they come in as they come in. Okay, first off, really, as a follow-up to one of the questions previously asked, I'll ask each of you, and I'll start with Mr. Maughan. Where would you develop? In other words, if you were going to do a land purchase and then lease back to a nonprofit or developer for affordable housing, do you have an eye on any particular land? About 1 minute, Mr. Maughan, if you even need that.
I wouldn't say I'm particularly looking at any single piece of property right now. I'm just saying that the city should always be on the watch for when property is being sold. Areas change all the time, and the needs change all the time. So we're gonna have to keep the needs in mind when property becomes available. And if the opportunity presents itself and it's reasonable and will work for our needs, we should purchase it.
Okay, and Mr. Struthers.
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of land left within the city limits. Hence why we're seeing quite a bit of annexation happening over the last couple of years. And so I'd be on the lookout for land that's out there. I know there's some discussion for some other areas within our city for development. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of land in our city and we're annexing. But I would be on the lookout and working with our staff to find that land to do it.
Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, so again, I would look for, something that when it becomes available. But again, the land we have is very expensive in Corvallis, and the money that we have to do this is very limited. And so it makes it very difficult in terms of actually trying to get the most people housed for the amount of dollars that we have. And so we need to look at this approach, but also other approaches as well to see what's the best way that we can get people housed.
Okay, so then I'm going to move on to bus services. I think we've discussed this, but this may be being asked in a slightly different way. Bus services have been reduced due to staffing shortages. In your view, what steps would the city need to take to restore those services as quickly as possible? Are you willing, if elected, to fight for those changes? And I will go ahead and start with Mr. Struthers.
So right now we're about 8 bus drivers short. I believe the number is about 16 of the 24 drivers. And that's really what we, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be recruiting, and whether that's the city pushing with our contractor to offer more money, offer bonuses. We have, in my opinion, I think we have that space to do that. I'm open to any discussion. So our third-party contractor contract comes up at the end of June 30th. And I'm open to whether that needs to be bring in-house, stay with our current contractor, or even go out with an RFP to find a new contractor, whatever is most economical and feasible operation to get back to where we need to be. And if elected mayor, I will be pushing those conversations, and actually have been having those conversations even now as a city councilor. We're in a very good situation though financially when it comes to our bus services with our transit fee, and that actually helps us leverage federal dollars to get other opportunities. And on a positive note, because they are not providing weekend services, our contractor is actually going to have to be paying us back, and that will help hopefully long-term when it comes to contract negotiations.
Mr. Hogg.
So I was on city council when we moved to make the buses fareless. And so that was getting away from having to pay a fee when you rode the bus. And when we did that, they increased the ridership tremendously. That was a very successful program. The problem now is, it's not necessarily one of money, but it's working conditions for the drivers. The drivers are leaving Corvallis and they're going to work in other cities such as Albany for about the same pay, but they said that the working conditions are much better. And so that is something we really need to address, is what is the issues that the drivers are having, and so that we can attract additional drivers for our bus service. We have a very large bus service, and it's very heavily used, and it's something that has been a very successful program, and we need to work to continue that.
And Mr. Maughan.
So I already brought this up earlier about bringing drivers in-house. As we heard, there's a contract that goes through June. So I think during that time, we need to use whatever leveraging we can to bring those services back online. There are people in our community that desperately rely on the bus to get to work or to get to their child to daycare or wherever they need to be, whether it could just be grocery shopping or going downtown to shop. And to not have those services on the weekend are seriously impacting our community. We need to do whatever we can to get it back. And I think we need to also focus on increasing drivers' pay, because a lot of, I know 3 of the drivers that have gone to Albany and they pay better there, and their service and their working environment is better. So that needs to be addressed. We need to fix it now.
Thank you. Mr. Hogg. police reform, would you advocate for reducing police budgets in one way or another first? And then second, would you necessarily just reduce the budget to reduce policing, or would you take that budget and add that somewhere else as prevention? I think that's what's intended to be asked here. So I'm going to leave it there and leave it with you, Mr. Hogg, 1 minute.
So thank you for the question. So when I was on city council, I actually advocated and was able to accomplish getting a bit more funding for public safety. So more funding for the fire department, 911 dispatch, and the police. And this allowed us to get community policing, which people walking the beat, police that better know the neighborhood, and also for much better training for police officers. So to improve the quality of policing, you need more money and not less money. Because when you cut budgets for a department, the very first thing that always gets cut is training. And we have in Corvallis a very high quality police department. And we also pay police officers a lot of money because we always want to get the very best people. Other cities have the idea of just trying to put bodies into uniforms and they go for the lowest common denominator in terms of who they hire. And Corvallis has always been about very high quality policing. And so I'm a very strong advocate that we need good policing requires more money, not less.
And I'll move over to Mr. Struthers.
Simple answer is no. I am not in favor of reducing our police budget, primarily because we do need officers. We do need officers in our city. And the fewer officers we have, that puts a strain on how often they can be out on the streets, how often they can be out there in our community and doing community policing. One of the things that our police fee does that we all pay into is that allows our officers not to be working more than, right now they're on 10-hour shifts, but they probably work a little bit more than that when you count either overtime and doing paper. But before that, they're working 12, 14, 16-hour shifts, and that puts a strain on one's mental health. And when your job is to protect the community and be out there, that's not good. And so we do need more funding for our police. We do need to make sure we're hiring enough officers so we're not taxing their mental health. And when they're put in a high stress situation, they can make good, sound judgments and decisions and not being put in a position that's not going to be negative for them and negative for our community.
Great. And Mr. Maughan.
I'm also not for defunding our police department. In the past, I've never been a pro-police person. As an activist, I've seen how over-policing affects communities in negative ways. However, I got to know our police department here and had many conversations with our chief of police, a couple of them now. And, the idea is we have better trained police. The money is spent on de-escalation training, understanding how to respond to somebody going through a mental health crisis. So we're not just pulling guns and firing, and affecting our community in negative ways. We're trying to actually have a community police department that cares about the community. We also did a lot of work on making sure our police department is more diverse in the community, because we do live in a college town that has a lot of individual diversity, but we're still in Oregon. So if we went just to how diverse the community is, we still have a lot of white police officers. So I appreciate the work that's been done in our police department. I support that work, and I'd like to see it continue. So I would not want to remove their funding and have just, as we heard, bodies in uniforms. I want to have an intelligent police department that knows how to think and make sound decisions.
Thank you. This may be something that can be asked as a yes or no question, but I'll give you each around a minute on it. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. Maughan on this. And here's what it is. Karen Rockwell, who had been executive director of our local Habitat for Humanity, used to say she could build more units of affordable housing if only the system development charges and other city fees were less. These fees now approach, or maybe even surpass, I'm not sure, $20,000 per individual home. Would you support changes to either make these sliding scale or waive these fees in at certain levels of affordable housing development? I'm going to start with Mr. Maughan.
The best way I can think of answering that is, I think any fee and any program should be analyzed from time to time. So I think we do need to take a look at our fees. Are they a burden and prohibiting affordable housing development? I have heard from a few developers, people, and even people just trying to build their own home or additions on the cost of like adding an ADU. So yeah, I think we should take a look at it, make sure we're doing the right thing, because there are sometimes just unintended consequences.
Mr. Struthers.
Simple answer is yes. And actually, I'm happy to say during my time on the city council, we've actually have implemented a waiver system, and we've been looking at different ways to modify that over time. And our system development charges are important because that's what helps expand our infrastructure from either whether it be water, wastewater, our streets, our parks. And so there's importance to them, but there are times and reasons why we do need to waive them or have a waiver set up. And we've been looking at that as a council, and we've have been doing some work to implement something.
And the question also, I think, had to do with somehow or another having a sliding scale depending on the, say, size of the home. Is that something you'd be willing to look at?
Yes, sir. It would be something I'd be willing to look at.
Great. Okay. And then moving over to Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, this is definitely something that needs to be looked at, but also at the same time, we need to look at what those fees are actually being used for, because they're also being used to address housing needs or making transportation more accessible within the community. So they're just not fees that are just collected and not being spent to actually improve livability for housing within the community. So there's a balance, and it might make sense to have the fees in some areas, and for some low-cost housing have reduced or minimal or even no fees for more affordable type of housing. So it's something definitely that should be looked at.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. I will start with Mr. Struthers for the next question. Currently, rent control is decided at the state level, and a number of folks in the community are looking at increases of up to almost 15% this next year. The rent control law does apparently result in that being a prospect for next year. The question is, would you, as mayor, advocate for the state to tighten the rent control laws, or to perhaps allow localities to make their own decisions? I think I said I would start with, I may not have said, I'll start with Mr. Struthers.
Thank you. And to answer the question, yes, I would be open to advocating for that, to having those conversations. We have some really great advocates in Salem with Representative Rayfield, Speaker Rayfield, and State Senators Gelser Blue, and we've had regular conversations, not necessarily on this topic, but some other topics that I'm trying to work on with some community members around neighborhood transportation issues. But I'd be interested in having that conversation. As I mentioned, up in my ward right now, there's a lot of folks who are in low income or even on fixed income, and we have conversations. I live in a manufactured park. I pay a space rent, and so that's not quite within the rent controls mechanisms, but we've been seeing that rent going up constantly because we have to pay for we rent the land. And so I'm up for having those conversations and working with our state to help our local community members and make sure that they can keep more of their income.
Okay, and then let's move over to Mr. Hogg.
So affordable housing is a big issue, and so it's not just for people buying homes, but it's for people renting homes. A lot of people rent in Corvallis. But it is helpful if things are done really thoughtfully at the state level, because if you make a rent control even tighter at the local level, it's going to discourage people from building new apartments or new housing in Corvallis. And so then it makes the housing become even more unaffordable. And so we need to really look at this as at a broad picture and work at the state level in terms of making sure we have the right level of control on the rent, so that we maximize the amount of housing that gets built in terms of making housing more affordable for everyone.
Mr. Maughan.
So I've already been having conversations with many state legislators and surrounding city council members on this issue. The problem we're seeing is, as an affordable housing world, you're limited to a 5% increase on average. So that's much lower than the state already sets as a cap. The problem is most people's income doesn't go up 5%. A lot of people's income doesn't even go up 3%. So that's creating an eventual problem where people, no matter what the cap is, will not be able to afford to live there. So I think we're going to have to go after state and federal funding to fill that gap. So that way we're not putting the increased cost of running apartments or rental housing on the renter, but find ways to fund their needs elsewhere, because we're going to, no matter what, we're going to hit a point that no one's going to be able to afford to live.
Okay, we have another question here from I believe, a prior counselor, Barbara Bull. Are you happy with the current public involvement program? Was the reorganization of advisory boards and commissioners successful? What would you do to improve these things, if anything? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with Mr. Hogg.
And so, no, I'm not happy with the way we've reduced public participation in Corvallis. I mean, there's reasons for it, but I think we have a very strong history in Corvallis of having a very high level of public participation. It's very time consuming, but people in Corvallis want to have a voice at the table. And I think ways we can relook at this is we can look at the 2040 vision statement and maybe in each of the high categories, structure that way in terms of having advisory boards. And so that way you would have advisory boards that are not necessarily just advocating, but actually making recommendations in terms of giving advice for overall policy. So I think there's a lot that can be done here in terms of making sure that everybody in Corvallis has a voice at the table in terms of making suggestions about policy changes.
Mr. Maughan.
So I was part of that restructuring of advisory boards, and when I was part of the process, I was told, no, this is not going to reduce public participation, and that's why I was like, great, okay, as long as it's not reducing it, let's do this. The end result, I am not happy with. We have a drastic reduction in public participation. People don't even feel comfortable coming and testifying at meetings at this point. We've seen a reduction in that. So I think we need to reanalyze it, and we need to look at what voices we want to hear and how do we get more people giving us advice. So I think we need to look at that and change our structure. We have a very intelligent community here in Corvallis, and we have people that have skills that, in specific areas, and we want that input. It's necessary for us to move forward and solve the issues we're going to be facing.
And then Mr. Struthers.
Yeah, and thank you for this question. And I was part of this process and actually helped lead a good amount of this process. And so I will say the end result, maybe not exactly what we all expected, but we also set the system up so that it can grow and change over time. Our previous system that we had with our advisory boards and our commissions, it was pretty hard rock and stone. And we had to, in my opinion, we had to go the hard way, rip the whole Band-Aid off, rip the whole thing apart, and start from the ground up. And we're still in the growing pains. We're still in the growing pains of what we developed over that 2-year process to what we have now. And so I think, with the system we have now, we're growing, we're changing it. We are starting to actually use our task forces that are coming out of that more for helping make policy decisions. And so we're seeing different ways to use our new process. I'm also happy to say that we adopted the International Association of Public Participation, which is pretty much the international standard for how you should be doing public participation for decision making and engaging how you should be involving the community on different decision points. And so, am I happy with the overall result? Yes. Do I think it's where it needs to be? No. We're in the infant stage, and it's going to be changing over the next several years.
So, I guess and then for the audience, we're only going to ask 1 or 2 more kind of geekier questions, I think, and then we'll get into some of the other issues that you're presenting. But, just as a point of order, a few years back, I forget what cycle it was, the issue of perhaps not having the whole city council come up for re-election every even year came up. Perhaps the terms could be staggered. Has there been any discussion, or does anybody have a view on that? About 30 seconds or so. I'll start with Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, so this would require a change to the city charter, but Corvallis is the only city, I believe, in all of Oregon that has 2-year terms. And so anytime you're an outlier, it's always good to take a look at this. And also we've been this way for about 50 years. And so the city has grown a lot over that time. And so it would be a good thing to look at. And the appropriate place to look at this is a neutral body such as the League of Women Voters, who could actually look and make a recommendation based on what they've seen and what would best serve the citizens of Corvallis.
And Mr. Struthers.
As a counselor, I chaired our charter review committee that looked at this, not just this, but our whole charter and finding areas. And we are the only city that's now left with 2-year seats. We're also the largest council with 9 councilors. I'm a proponent of moving to councilors to 4 years. I would like to see 4 councilors up with the mayor and then 5 councilors in the opposite 2 years. And I think it would be good for our community because it takes time. It takes at least a year to year and a half for a councilor to get their feet on the ground, get to understand what they're doing. And by that time, you're running for an election again and just determining whether you want to keep doing this or not. And that's not good. That's not good for policy decision making and being able to be effective as a counselor. So I'm actually a proponent of moving to 4 years for our counselors.
Mr. Maughan.
So I actually was very vocal on this issue when it was brought up. My concern with going 4 years with a volunteer position is the type of people you'd have serving your community. I'm concerned we'd see a lot more just retired folks or independently wealthy folks. What we want is more broader representation to represent the community, varying income levels, varying age groups. So my concern is if we're going to go 4 years, I feel we need to increase the stipend to at least enough to help compensate the time and possibly pay for childcare if that need be. So we can, even if a single parent could afford childcare, then they can serve on council. Other than that, I was really concerned about losing that representation, but I'm not opposed to a 4-year term.
Okay. And Mr. Maughan, I'll start with you on this next one. I don't think the questioner is really asking how many folks we have that we are serving from out of state or out of the area that are homeless, but they're asking instead, what is our responsibility to somebody to say a recent transplant and homeless in terms of providing services? Could I get about a minute from you on city responsibility towards those folks?
So my understanding up before COVID, the population of unhoused in the area stayed pretty stable. It was the same individuals. And the growth we saw was due to areas like the apartments on 5th Street that evicted everybody for no cause eviction to remodel it. When you get evicted like that, where are you going to go? There's no apartments that are available. It's hard to find a home. A friend of mine lost his apartment on fire. He's still living with his sister. COVID did change that.
I think the question was more directed at really the responsibility we have in the specific instance as a city.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the city's responsibility is, considering the city's not the one providing those services. That's done through other communities, like other entities like Unity Shelter. But I think it's important to watch those numbers and see if there's a trend.
I'll go to Mr. Hogg.
So again, it's the county that is ultimately responsible for providing social services. And it's not something that cities normally do. I mean, Corvallis as a city has bent over backwards to try to provide a helping hand and provide additional funding to help people who are in need, and also to provide some advocacy to help folks. But again, this is really something that the county is well equipped that has the social services. We cannot build a wall around Corvallis. People come and people go as they please. It's a free country. But when people are here, we need to do what we can to help people who are in need.
Thank you. And then Mr. Struthers, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. If I'm understanding, we're primarily talking about people who are coming to Corvallis and then whether or not it's the city's.
Yes, that's the impetus of the question.
If whether you're unhoused or if you can pay, if you can own your own housing, you come to Corvallis, you're part of our community. And so if they come to Corvallis, the city with our county partners, with our service provider partners, we do have a responsibility to help support them, whether that's, providing them housing, providing them mental health services, whether services they need, whether it's through Stone Soup, shelter. But ultimately, the city's responsibility is to help with land acquisition, help with funding mechanisms, doing pass-through dollars. Over the last few years, we've passed through millions of dollars to our providers, and that's the biggest thing we can do to be helping anyone who moves into Corvallis that needs assistance is working with our providers and helping provide financial assistance to them.
Mr. Struthers, while I have you, I will move to this next question, which has to do with outdoor dining that's currently in some of the parking spaces and sidewalks in downtown Corvallis. I know that recently these were supposed to expire October 31. It's been extended to, I believe, sometime in January. There is some question about whether that's best for retail shops that would perhaps prefer there were more parking spaces downtown at this point going into the holiday shopping season. What was your vote on that? And by the way, as a point of order, to what date is the outdoor dining now extended?
Yeah, so it was actually last night at our council meeting, we used an extension date of January 6th. And that was actually an amended date. Originally, it was the original motion was for May 1st. The majority of council wasn't comfortable with that. It was moved to January 6th. And I was actually on the fence of moving towards the May 1st. I like the longer extension. And I hear that the issue about retail, but we have a lot of parking downtown right now. The BROW program, the business right-of-way program, is used primarily in our downtown area. And there's a lot of parking spaces. I believe one community member, actually, I think they're a local business owner, when they were testifying at the council last night, they said they counted 1,300 parking spaces. I don't know if that number is exact, but that's what they did counting. And so we have a lot of parking downtown. And in fact, retail shops, they could actually use the business right-of-way program. It's not just for restaurants, it's for all businesses. So they could even benefit by having outdoor shopping as well.
Okay, and then I'll move over to Mr. Maughan.
So anybody who shops downtown does know it is difficult to find a parking space sometimes. But that depends on the time of day and definitely what day. Saturdays, good luck. You should ride a bike. And that's what I try to do, or go early. I've always supported the business right-of-way program. I think it's really livened up our downtown, and I'd like to see it expand throughout Corvallis. So I support it, and I think it's good for businesses, and I think retail businesses can do the same thing and really benefit from it. It's not just for restaurants. I think it draws people downtown. It's a lively way to be, and we're still in a position where people are not feeling safe being in doors and confined spaces. So I think it's important to support our businesses in any way we can.
And then over to you, Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, so I actually lived in the downtown area, and when I was on city council, I represented this as part of Ward 2. I think this is a great program. We shouldn't be always just focusing on the automobile. We should treat pedestrians and bicyclists on equal footing. And this has really brought a lot of people to the downtown area. And people go to dining. They also have to maybe eat, or before they eat, they go shopping at retail stores. So it's been a way to actually improve the dynamics of downtown. And I think it's been a very welcoming improvement to our community. I think we need to look at some safety issues, whether they're building some large outdoor dining areas that are right at the corner or intersections that might be blocking views for traffic. And also look at how the city gets compensated, because it's losing revenue from these parking spaces, which have parking meters on. And so that money could be used for doing other improvements in the downtown area. But I think this has been a very great program.
Okay, and then next question is, going back to the new Green New Deal and to home energy scores, this questioner wants to know in a direct way, what will city government do to reduce its own carbon footprint, either in terms of its own buildings or its fleet, or workers getting to work? What would you advocate for as mayor? I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. Maughan.
So I've already spoken to this earlier. The city's done amazing work implementing the goal that I pushed for of 100% renewable by 2030. We're going to be 100% renewable electrical power, hopefully by next year, as long as everything works. I will always advocate to continue to address climate change. I think we need to convert our fleet to electric when possible. I know the fire department really enjoyed checking out an electric bus, but the cost was not something we can afford to do at this time. But we can do other things by supporting the community's transition to renewable energy as well, installing more vehicle chargers for the community, which would also support our downtown. And again, finding ways of new construction like Eugene's trying to do by moving away from natural gas.
Okay, and then I will move over to Mr. Struthers.
Thank you for this question. And the city is doing a lot of great work. We did learn last night at the city council meeting that we will be by next year 100% renewable energy, either by purchasing credits or through our own efforts. I believe I mentioned earlier, we're currently about to remodel fire stations 2 and 3. Those are going to have solar panels on top of them, and they will be ready for electric fire trucks hookup when we're able to purchase those. I'm also pleased to say that as our chair of our regional transportation metro board, Campo, I signed a letter to help this Corvallis transit system get a grant, about $2.6 million to get 2 electric buses and the charging stations for those. And that by the time we get those, and we're about to receive 2 other buses, we're gonna have at least 4 electric buses in our city. And so we're doing a lot of work. We did hear last night an unfortunate news. We did not get a grant to help pay for the study of solar at the Taylor Water Treatment Plant. But we also heard from Public Works that they are looking at other funding mechanisms, whether that's internal dollars or other grants that they could pursue. And so we're doing a lot of work, and I'm happy to see that that's happening.
Mr. Hogg.
So climate change, as I mentioned previously, is a top issue, and the city should be leading by example, which is what it is doing. Working and trying to get more electrical vehicles, solar power, and better insulation in buildings. And I think as people can see what the city is doing, they can also incorporate that into their own lives as well. And so again, and this is an important issue. And again, I think it is something that the city can lead by example.
Excellent. Then I'm going to get a closing statement from each of you, 30 seconds each, and I will start with you, Mr. Hogg.
Okay, so last time I ran for mayor 4 years ago, I knocked on 5,000 doors across the city in all different neighborhoods and talked to many people about what their issues are. And then most of the issues people have is local to their own neighborhood. And so on a take-upping on that, I would like to, as if elected mayor, start a Walk with the Mayor program where I walk through different neighborhoods, give people a chance to actually meet the mayors, express what the issues are, and actually point things out in their neighborhood that need fixing. And so again, I've always been people-focused and neighborhood-focused and trying to start from the grassroots and represent the local people in our community.
Excellent. And then Mr. Maughan, please.
So this November, everybody gets to choose who represents them at the city level. I plan on holding quarterly forums to hear from different areas of the community on their concerns and try to encourage more public participation through that venue. I have also lost my train of thought there. Anyways, I suggest people look at people's voting record. Anybody up here can say whatever we want to say to try to talk you into voting for us. But really look at everybody's voting record, look at the issues and where they stood on and see if that represents your values. I've been very clear. You can learn more about me at my website, maughanformayor.com.
Mr. Struthers.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone listening tonight. And thank you to our
30
host.
seconds.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I want to start by saying, I'm currently serving as a city councilor, as your council vice president and our Metro Planning Organization chair. I apologize if you just heard my kid in the background screaming. I'm a father of 2 and have a wonderful wife, and something's happening behind me right now. So I'm glad we're about to wrap up here. In my 4 years as city councilors, I've shown I can facilitate and lead on significant issues facing the city. I've done work statewide through the League of Oregon Cities and their legislative policy committees. And I do a lot of work regionally with other electeds in other cities and at the county level. So I feel like I can step into this leadership role, lead our city. And please visit my website, struthersforcorvallis.com, to learn more about me and my family.
Thank you, Mr. Struthers, Mr. Maughan, and Mr. Hogg all. Thank you for respecting the times this evening, and really appreciate you taking the time to help the public understand who you would be as a mayor. Okay, for the audience, I want to remind you this will be a ranked choice election. You will see something in the next couple days on our site if you have any questions about that. Our endorsements should come out on Saturday is the current plan. On Thursday, we host a debate for the 3 contested city council seats. And other than that, thank you for tuning in. Emily.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, and thank you all. And of course, we want to extend a big thanks to our Corvallis Advocate staff and all of the work they do behind the scenes that make these CitySpeak town halls possible. Please check our website for updates on upcoming CitySpeaks, as well as archives of past CitySpeaks. And again, thanks to Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op for helping to make this series possible. The CitySpeak is now adjourned. Good night, everyone.